Our world runs on an invisible empire. An empire built not on land or gold, but on silicon. Every swipe of a screen, every server that hums in the dark, every line of code that powers our artificial intelligence, it all flows through microscopic pathways etched onto impossibly complex chips. This entire technological revolution, this new reality we inhabit, is dominated by one company, from one island, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. They are the undisputed king, the name everyone knows, the silent ruler of the modern age. But what if the most important story in this Silicon Empire isn't about the king? What if it's about the king's forgotten older brother? A company born first, destined for greatness, that fell into disgrace. A story of ambition, crime, and a comeback so audacious it's rewriting the map of global technology. This is the story of United Microelectronics Corporation, or UMC. How did Taiwan's original chip champion, once poised for glory, become embroiled in one of the biggest industrial espionage scandals of the 21st century? And how, from the ashes of that humiliation, did it stage a brilliant reinvention that has made it more powerful and more critical than ever before? Our story begins in the 1970s, on an island known more for exporting umbrellas and shoes than for high technology. Taiwan was at a crossroads. Its economic miracle was built on low-tech manufacturing, but a group of visionary government technocrats, led by figures like Li Kuo-ting, saw a different future. They made a world-changing bet that Taiwan could leapfrog into the high-tech era. Their chosen instrument was the Industrial Technology Research Institute, or ITRI, a state-backed entity with a singular mission: to absorb foreign technology, nurture it, and seed a domestic industry from scratch. In 1976, ITRI secured a pivotal technology transfer from the American electronics giant RCA, laying the groundwork for what was to come. 4 years later, in 1980, ITRI spun off its first commercial venture. It was called United Microelectronics Corporation. UMC was a national champion from day one. It was Taiwan's first semiconductor company, the first to be listed on the Taiwan Stock Exchange in 1985, and the great hope for the island's technological destiny. UMC was built on the standard business model of the time, the same one used by global giants like Intel. It was an integrated device manufacturer, or IDM. This meant it did everything in-house. It designed its own chips, and it manufactured them in its own factories, or fabs. It was a self-contained powerhouse, the pride of Taiwan. But inside ITRI, another man was watching. A man who had even served as UMC's chairman. His name was Morris Chang, and he saw a different path forward. In 1987, with backing from the Taiwanese government and the Dutch company Philips, Chang founded a new company with a radical new idea: Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. TSMC wouldn't be an IDM. It would be a pure-play foundry. It wouldn't design a single chip of its own. Instead, it would act as a contract manufacturer, a factory for hire. Its customers would be the explosion of new, fabless companies, like a young NVIDIA or Qualcomm, who were brilliant at chip design, but had no way to build them. This was a revolutionary business model, one that fundamentally understood the future of the industry. The specialization allowed fabless companies to focus entirely on innovation, while TSMC focused entirely on manufacturing excellence. The move was so disruptive that UMC was eventually forced to copy it. In 1995, it abandoned its IDM roots and spun off its own successful design divisions, creating future giants like MediaTek in the process, to become a pure-play foundry itself. But by then, it was already playing catch-up. For years, the two Hsinchu-based companies were fierce rivals, their state-of-the-art facilities often rising right across the street from one another. But the rivalry was less a battle of equals and more a story of a visionary pulling away. TSMC's focused model, combined with Morris Chang's aggressive strategy of sacrificing early profits to gain market share and perfect his manufacturing yields, proved unstoppable. The financial commitment told the whole story. By the mid-2010s, TSMC's capital expenditure on research and development was routinely over $10 billion a year. UMC's was less than $2 billion. One was investing to conquer the future. The other was struggling to keep up with the present. While UMC perfected the role of a reliable second-source foundry, TSMC relentlessly pursued the leading edge, the smallest and most powerful process nodes. By the turn of the century, the gap between them had become a chasm. UMC, the firstborn son, had been eclipsed. The scene shifts. It's the mid-2010s, and the center of gravity in the world of technology is being pulled toward China. The Chinese government, under its Made in China 2025 initiative, has declared semiconductor self-sufficiency a top national priority. They are acutely aware of what they call the Kabosi challenge, the stranglehold that Western nations have on critical chip technologies. One of their most glaring weaknesses is in DRAM, or dynamic random access memory. These are the workhorse memory chips essential for everything from smartphones to the massive server farms that power the cloud. China can design them, but it can't manufacture them at scale. It's a humiliating dependency that Beijing is determined to break. The solution, as is often the case in China's state-led economy, was to throw money at the problem. In 2016, the government funneled $5 billion into creating Fujian Jinhua Integrated Circuit. It was a state-owned enterprise with a gleaming new factory and a single solitary mission: produce DRAM chips. There was just one problem. Money can build a factory, but it can't buy decades of institutional knowledge. Fujian Jinhua had the hardware, but it didn't have the recipe. It lacked the human expertise, the trade secrets, the complex web of intellectual property needed to make advanced memory chips. So, it went looking for a partner that could provide the technology it needed. And it found a willing, and perhaps desperate, one in UMC. For UMC, this was a tempting proposition. Having lost the legitimate race to TSMC and unable to afford the colossal R&D spending required for advanced nodes, China's ambition offered a dangerous shortcut. A way to get back in the high-stakes memory game without spending billions of its own money. In 2016, the two companies signed a cooperation agreement. UMC, with funding from Fujian Jinhua, would develop the DRAM technology that the Chinese firm so desperately needed. On the surface, it looked like a standard technology transfer deal. Beneath the surface, a crime was being set in motion. The plan began with poaching. UMC targeted engineers at the Taiwan subsidiary of America's leading memory chip maker, Micron Technology. They successfully lured away 3 key employees, including a senior vice president named Stephen Chen, with the promise of substantial raises and prestigious new titles. Before they walked out the door at Micron for the last time, 2 of the engineers, J.T. Ho and Kenny Wang, executed the heist. They downloaded a trove of Micron's most valuable and confidential files, over 900 of them. These weren't just documents, they were the crown jewels: detailed schematics, manufacturing process flows, design rules for advanced DRAM. It was the entire blueprint for Micron's competitive advantage, a body of work that US prosecutors would later value at somewhere between $400 million and an astonishing $8.75 billion. Once at UMC, this stolen data was handled with the clandestine care of a spy agency. The engineers stored the files on personal cloud accounts and USB hard drives. When UMC's own internal IT department detected Micron's intellectual property on an employee's computer, raising an internal alarm, management didn't shut the project down. Instead, according to court documents, they approved the issuance of 2 off-network laptop computers. These machines were deliberately kept separate from UMC's main network, allowing the team to access and work with the stolen Micron data without any further risk of detection. The gambit was an act of strategic desperation, born directly from UMC's failure to compete with TSMC through legitimate innovation. Unable to win the technology race, it chose to cheat. China's ambition provided the motive and the means, but the decision was UMC's. It was a high-risk, high-reward play to vault itself back into relevance. And for a time, it seemed to be working. The deception couldn't last forever. Micron's internal security eventually uncovered the breach and the staggering scale of the data theft. The company didn't just file a civil lawsuit, it took its evidence to the US government. The timing was critical. Washington was growing increasingly hawkish on Chinese economic practices, and this case was a smoking gun. In November 2018, the hammer fell. The US Department of Justice unsealed a blockbuster indictment that sent shockwaves through the semiconductor industry. It charged UMC, the Chinese state-owned Fujian Jinhua, and the 3 former Micron engineers with a raft of crimes, the most serious being conspiracy to commit economic espionage. This wasn't just a corporate lawsuit, it was a major geopolitical event, one of the first flagship cases under the DOJ's newly announced China Initiative, a program designed specifically to counter state-sponsored intellectual property theft. For UMC, this was an existential crisis. The company faced potential fines of up to $20 billion, a sum that could have destroyed it. Its executives faced lengthy prison sentences. Its access to the American market and American technology was under threat. Pinned against the wall, UMC's leadership made a calculated, strategic choice. They decided to cut their losses. In October 2020, UMC appeared in a San Francisco federal court and pleaded guilty. It was a carefully negotiated deal. UMC pleaded guilty to a single, lesser count of receiving and possessing a stolen trade secret. In exchange for the guilty plea, the company agreed to pay a $60 million fine, at the time, the second largest criminal trade secret fine in US history, and, most importantly, to cooperate fully with the DOJ in its ongoing investigation and prosecution of its co-defendant, Fujian Jinhua. The more serious economic espionage charges were dropped. It was a pragmatic, if humiliating, move. The plea deal was the first concrete step in UMC's long road to reinvention. It was an admission of guilt, but it was also a business decision to end a potentially fatal war with the US government and begin the arduous process of cleaning its slate. But the story took one final stunning twist. Despite UMC's guilty plea and its cooperation, the case against Fujian Jinhua went to trial. And in February 2024, a US federal judge acquitted the Chinese state-owned firm of all charges. The judge ruled that while UMC's employees had clearly stolen the technology, prosecutors had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Fujian Jinhua had itself orchestrated or directly participated in the theft. The verdict was a stark illustration of the immense difficulty in prosecuting state-backed economic espionage. China's model of using a third-party partner like UMC had worked as a brilliant legal shield. The agent of the crime was convicted, but the ultimate beneficiary walked free. It highlighted a critical vulnerability in Western legal systems when confronting the opaque structures of state-directed industrial policy. For UMC, however, the damage was done. The DRAM project with Jinhua was dead. The company was now a convicted corporate felon in the eyes of the West. Its reputation was in tatters. Its strategy of chasing the leading edge through illicit means had ended in catastrophic failure. The company had hit rock bottom. By 2017, even before the full weight of the law came down, the writing was on the wall for UMC. The company was bleeding money on R&D for advanced technologies it simply couldn't afford. It was losing the race to TSMC so badly that it was no longer even in the same competition. The path of pursuing the absolute leading edge, of trying to be another TSMC, was a dead end. So, in a move that stunned the industry, UMC's leadership made a radical, deeply counterintuitive decision. They decided to retreat. In a series of announcements between 2017 and 2018, the company declared it was officially halting all R&D for process nodes below 14 nanometers. It was a public surrender. UMC was quitting the nanometer race. But this wasn't an act of desperation. It was an act of genius. The new philosophy was simple. Instead of fighting a losing battle on a field defined by their rival, they would redefine the battlefield itself. UMC would pour all of its resources, its focus, and its 4 decades of manufacturing experience into becoming the world's undisputed master of mature and specialty process nodes. Technologies like 28 nanometers, 40 nanometers, and 65 nanometers. So what are mature nodes? They aren't the chips that power the latest iPhone or the most powerful AI supercomputers. Those are the supermodels of the silicon world, built on the bleeding edge. Mature nodes are the workhorses. They are the invisible backbone of our connected lives. They are the microcontrollers in your car's braking system, the power management ICs in your television, the Wi-Fi chip in your laptop, and the sensors in a factory robot. They are less glamorous, but they are essential, and they are produced in colossal, mind-boggling volumes. While the world was obsessed with the race to 5 nanometers and 3 nanometers, UMC realized there was a kingdom to be built in the technologies that everyone else was starting to leave behind. This pivot was a masterclass in asymmetric business strategy. UMC recognized it could not win a head-to-head fight with TSMC, which had overwhelming superiority in capital and technology. So, it chose not to fight. It ceded the high-profile battle for the leading edge and focused its forces on a different territory, a less competitive but vast and highly profitable market where its own strengths in cost efficiency and operational excellence could shine. It turned its greatest weakness, a lack of funds for cutting-edge R&D, into its greatest strategic advantage: focus. The strategy didn't just work, it worked brilliantly. Almost immediately after the pivot, UMC's fortunes began to turn. The company, freed from the ruinous expense of chasing Moore's law, transformed into a cash flow machine. The numbers tell a stunning story of a corporate turnaround. As the table shows, from the depths of the scandal in 2018, UMC's net income exploded to a peak of nearly $3 billion in 2022. While revenue growth has been more modest, the profitability of its new focus strategy is undeniable. The dip in 2023 and 2024 reflects a broader cyclical downturn in the semiconductor market, but the company remains solidly profitable, a testament to its resilient new business model. UMC quickly established a dominant position in the market it had chosen to own. It became a leader in key mature nodes like 28 nanometers and 22 nanometers, which became the sweet spot for a huge range of applications. The company became the go-to foundry for the world's automotive, Internet of Things, IoT, and communications industries, sectors that needed reliable, cost-effective chips in massive quantities. This new focus is reflected in its customer base. In 2023, UMC announced a long-term strategic cooperation agreement with Infineon, the German automotive semiconductor giant. UMC would use its 40-nanometer process to produce huge volumes of microcontrollers for the German company, securing a critical supply chain for the booming electric and smart vehicle market. This partnership was a powerful symbol of the new UMC, no longer a disgraced competitor, but a trusted, indispensable partner to Western industrial champions. By deliberately stepping out of TSMC's shadow, UMC had built a more stable, more defensible, and consistently profitable business. It proved that in the ruthless world of semiconductors, success didn't have to mean being number one. Sometimes it meant being the best at being number two. But just as UMC carved out its profitable sanctuary, a new and formidable threat began to emerge on the horizon. A threat that, ironically, was an unintended consequence of the very geopolitical forces that had once brought UMC to its knees. The threat was China. As the US-China tech war intensified, Washington tightened its export controls, effectively blocking Chinese companies like SMIC from acquiring the advanced extreme ultraviolet, EUV, lithography machines needed to produce leading-edge chips. Cut off from the future, Beijing did what it does best. It unleashed a tidal wave of state subsidies to dominate the technology of the present. With the path to 7 nanometers and below blocked, China's massive government investment was funneled into the one area where it could still compete: mature process nodes. Chinese foundries began a frantic, unprecedented expansion of their 28 nanometer, 40 nanometer, and older manufacturing capacity. By 2023, China's share of global mature node capacity had swelled to 33% and was projected to keep growing rapidly. This has created a looming overcapacity problem. Analysts now warn of a coming price war as Chinese firms, driven by the political mandate of self-sufficiency rather than by profit margins, are expected to flood the global market with cheap, subsidized chips. This threatens to crush the profitability of commercial players like UMC, whose entire comeback was built on the stability of the mature node market. So, can a strategy built on avoiding a fight with one giant, TSMC, survive a brutal price war with another, the full force of state-backed China Inc.? The very niche that UMC so brilliantly cultivated is now under direct assault. There are, of course, counter-arguments. Some analysts believe the threat is overblown. They argue that in an era of heightened geopolitical tension, Western customers in critical sectors like automotive and industrial will prioritize supply chain security, quality, and trust over a 10% price cut from a Chinese supplier. Relationships, they contend, will act as a buffer against a purely price-driven race to the bottom. But the risk is real and acute. UMC's greatest challenge today comes not from its old rival across the street, but from across the strait. Just as the shadow of Chinese competition loomed largest, UMC made its most audacious and surprising move yet. A move that would complete its redemption arc and fundamentally reshape its future. In January 2024, UMC announced a landmark strategic partnership, not with a customer, but with an American titan and one of its oldest rivals, Intel. The deal was a masterstroke of strategic alignment. Together, the two companies would co-develop a 12-nanometer FinFET process platform. This was a technology node more advanced than anything in UMC's current portfolio, representing a leap back into the high-performance computing space it had abandoned years earlier. And crucially, these chips would be manufactured not in Taiwan or Asia, but in Intel's existing world-class fabrication plants in Chandler, Arizona. Mass production is slated to begin in 2027. This wasn't just a partnership, it was a symbiotic alliance that created a win-win scenario for everyone involved. For UMC, it was a low-cost ticket back into the advanced technology game, a secure foothold inside the United States that insulated it from geopolitical risk, and a massive acceleration of its technology roadmap without the multi-billion-dollar price tag. For Intel, it was a huge boost for its IDM 2.0 strategy. It allowed them to fill their expensive, underutilized fabs, gain crucial foundry experience and customer relationships from a seasoned pro, and instantly become a major player in a key market segment. And for the United States, the partnership helps create the kind of resilient, geographically diversified supply chain for critical chips that was the central goal of the Chips and Science Act. The symbolism was powerful. In a statement, UMC co-president Jason Wang said, "This effort will enable our customers to benefit from the resiliency of an added Western footprint." The company once convicted of stealing American technology to help a Chinese state-owned enterprise was now a cornerstone partner in building America's technological fortress against Chinese dominance. The redemption was complete. UMC's story is a powerful lesson in corporate resilience, strategic ingenuity, and the art of the comeback. It is undeniable proof that in the brutal, fast-moving world of technology, success doesn't always mean being number one. By seeing the world clearly, understanding its own limitations, and having the courage to retreat from a losing battle, UMC redefined the terms of its own success. By embracing its position as the other foundry, it carved out a kingdom of its own.